Chapter 26. Heading back home again, Doreen took a different and longer route. Muggs could use the walk, and she could distract herself from her bizarre visit with Nan, as Doreen's mind worried on all the little bits and pieces of seemingly unrelated information on the two dead men related to Nan's house that Doreen had gathered from her neighbors. As for Nan's penchant for marijuana cookies, Doreen couldn't even begin to think about that and shoved it to the back recesses of her mind. She also couldn't imagine Nan having anything to do with this murder mess, but unless some better evidence showed up, Nan was the most obvious suspect. How depressing was that? And her two betting pools regarding the missing man, Robert, made her even more suspicious. Doreen would normally have crossed the river on the small bridge, but she headed the other way, staying on the city street blocks, going through town and then coming alongside the creek. It was a slow sojourn home, letting Muggs happily sniff the trail to his heart's content. Thaddeus sat on her shoulder, suspiciously quiet. She gave him several cautious looks, but he appeared to be swaying gently to every movement. As she stood on the creek pathway, studying the backs of the houses, she realized that this was the same creek leading to the little bridge behind her place also. Farther up was where she'd seen Brenda's boy in the tree on Thursday. She walked the path, hoping she was heading toward home. If so, she'd see her house in a few minutes. It was such a beautiful walk here with the birds and the sunshine. Quiet and peaceful. Up ahead, she could see the houses on the cul-de-sac beside her cul-de-sac. She was almost home. With Thaddeus giving a running commentary of oddball noises as he sat on her shoulder, and Muggs wandering from place to place, Doreen slowly meandered home. It was a different life here. Despite all that had happened since her arrival 3 days earlier on Wednesday, it was a good life. At least she hoped it would be. The creek drifted slowly beside her. The water levels were low, but overall enough water kept things flowing smoothly and curbed the smell of wet mud. She was only about 10 or maybe 15 minutes away from Nan's place right now by traveling this route. She stopped and studied the water. They were coming up to her cul-de-sac, as far she could tell. A pretty place to walk, particularly if someone wanted to stay hidden. Could someone have carried a body that distance? It would be a heavy load. But a wheelbarrow would make it easier. She studied the ground to find it relatively smooth, without big logs to cross over. But still, it would be taking a heck of a chance of being discovered by pushing a dead body along here in a wheelbarrow. Even though all the properties on her side of the creek had been fenced off from this creek, Travis had been playing on the far side. So there were people around regardless. Although someone might be seen from the back of the houses across the creek, especially from a second-floor advantage, still any witnesses would have to be looking specifically at the creek path to see this hypothetical wheelbarrow transporting a dead body. She'd never seen anybody walking back there. But then she'd never been looking. And she had only been here 3 days, and each one had been pretty time-consuming. A log was up ahead. She walked over and sat down, happy to enjoy the view in the sunshine. Muggs sniffed around her feet and then lay down beside her. She scratched his back. "Hey, buddy." He huffed heavily, gave a small bark, then dropped his head on her foot. "Yeah, you get to roam about, get muddy. It's a good life." She sat, talking with the animals, lightly stroking Thaddeus's feathers. "We should have brought Goliath with us." Muggs gave an odd kind of a noise and bolted to his feet. His nose faced upstream, his nostrils flaring. Then he barked. At what, she didn't know. She stared at him. "What's the matter, boy?" He raced off, pulling on his leash. She held on tighter and stood. "Okay, let's see what's bothering you." She didn't have to go very far when she caught sight of something that had her stomach dropping to her feet. She walked closer to make sure, her phone already in her hand. She hit Mac's speed dial number and waited until he answered. "What's the matter, Doreen?" She took a shaky breath. "I found another body." After a stark silence on the other end, he exploded, "What?" "I'm at the creek about 100 yards, maybe 50 yards, from my house. About 10 to 15 minutes away from Nan's retirement home. Apparently, a man went missing from there. I think this is him." She took 2 steps closer. "He's lying in the water. He looks like he's been here for a little while." "Did you touch the body?" She shivered. "No. I presume he's dead. I've been sitting on a log here for at least 5 minutes." "Sitting?" Mac asked in surprise. "Not beside the body," she cried out. "That would be terrible and so very gross." She shook her head. "I was sitting on a log a few yards down the creek when Muggs barked. So I checked it out. The man's wearing jeans and a hoodie jacket from the looks of it. I don't know. Maybe it's a runner's jacket. He has running shoes on." She turned to stare up the creek, then down a ways. "Maybe it's somebody else. I don't know." "Don't touch the body. Stay right there. If I come to your house and go through the back gate, will I see you?" "If you come to my house, go through the back gate and take a left, then carry on down the path, you can't miss me. Be there in 10. She could still hear him on the line. In a much harder voice he added, "Don't move." This time she heard the audible click as he hung up from the call. She stared at the bright blue sky and sunshine. Why me? Muggs, now that he understood where the smell came from, laid down at her side and proceeded to fall asleep. Thaddeus, on the other hand, had a whole different thing to say. He stared over her head and screeched at the top of his voice, "Murder in the water. Murder in the water. Stop, you silly old bird. You want all the neighbors to know somebody's out here?" Thaddeus crooned a sorrowful song. Almost like a keening, wailing song that she knew some Aboriginal tribes sang for their dead. She looked at him in wonder. "You have hidden depths, Thaddeus. But could you possibly keep it down?" She stood protectively beside the body. Although if anybody else came along, she would look darn suspicious. With her phone, she took several pictures of the body in the water and the area around it. And because she had to wait anyway, she looked for any signs of what might have happened to him. Surely Mac would understand that much. The dirt was a little bit scuffed up at the pathway, although no marks resembled wheelbarrow tracks. She quickly stepped back, took a few more pictures of the scuffled area, and searched for a murder weapon. For all she knew, the guy committed suicide, or maybe he'd been drunk and fell in the creek and drowned. She didn't find anything of interest. But it didn't stop her from taking lots of pictures. She walked up the pathway and took some more pictures, walked to the other side and took even more. She had no idea what she was looking for, but figured he'd be up on the matter a little later. Right now she was just protecting the crime scene. And for added measure, she took as many pictures of the creek as she could. And the houses on the far side. Who knew if anybody heard or saw anything? This cul-de-sac wasn't where her house was. This was the adjoining one. She hadn't met any of these people yet. Of course, once everyone heard she had found this body, there would be no end to the chaos in her world. And the added notoriety to her as the newcomer. She waited 10 minutes, which stretched to 15, then to 20. Just when pulling out her phone on the half-hour mark to call Mac and to give him crap for being so late, she heard a noise on the far side of the creek. She waited, her heart racing. It could be the murderer coming back, if the body in the creek had been murdered. That didn't stop the thoughts from going through her head. She kept watch nervously. Suddenly Mac appeared in front of her. He took one look at her and nodded. Good. You're still here. Where is the body? I said I'd be here, she snapped, relieved he'd finally arrived. I kept my word. You, on the other hand, are late. She pointed wordlessly at the creek. The poor man is there. They both stared at the man, floating face mostly down with just enough of his face showing to see his open eye, the dirt and water in his mouth. He pivoted to look at her. Did you touch him? She shook her head. No, you told me not to. Have you been standing here in this vicinity for the last 10 minutes? 30 minutes. That's how long since I called you. And yes, I have been here walking this pathway. I was afraid somebody else would come before you did. He nodded, his attention returning to the area, then to the body. I want you to go home, go inside your house and stay there until I come. He glanced at Muggs and said, Good job, Muggs. Muggs barked, walked over to him looking for a scratch. Mac bent down and gave Muggs what he wanted. Mac glanced at Thaddeus and said to Doreen, I'm surprised he hasn't popped up with any comments. She snorted. He's been crooning some kind of death song for about 10 minutes. And then before that he called out, Murder in the water. Murder in the water. Mac nodded. Go home with them both, please. And you're sure that Muggs didn't touch the body, or pick up anything else either? Not that I saw. He never went in the water or to the body, never touched or took a bite at anything, she said defensively. Mac nodded. I have to check. You know that. She shrugged. It'd be nice if you kept my name out of this. He snorted. Yeah, in your dreams. She rolled her eyes at him. I'll put coffee on. Make sure you get there before the pot turns off. She turned with her animals in tow and headed home.